Well, hi, everyone. I'm Andrew Monshine, the Associate Dean of Research and Associate Professor in Urban and Environmental Planning here in the School of Architecture. And I am simply grateful to have you all here today and, to welcome you and to welcome everyone to this panel on the just transition. I think, in the School of Architecture, we are focused this semester and this year and really all the time on this idea of transformation. But transformation is not just something that starts from zero. It's not just from a tabula rasa. It is a transition. And I think that the work that we're going to hear about today from, that we're privileged to hear about from our guests and from Barbara Brown Wilson, our leader today and leader all the time, faculty director of UVA Equity Center and associate professor in urban and environmental planning. This idea of transition, that we're coming from somewhere that the social, political, and economic framing of why we find ourselves in the predicament we're in has to take into account both history as well as the systems within which we create the current setting, as well as the solutions that we find as planners and designers and all of us within these allied fields. So having said that, I think let me hand it over to Barbara to do the true introductions. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. It's really, and thank you to the whole Dean's office for hosting this. I am lucky enough to have Karen Abrams as a colleague in many things, and we had been scheming about how to bring together thinkers from across the country that are really, as Andrew said, thinking about the how do we get from where we are to where we want to be, and what does that look like? How is it happening across the country, across the globe, and to be able to hear from these three brilliant leaders is a real thrill. And I think we're even just excited to sort of be in space together. I think this is a conversation that we're all really eager to have. I will introduce them, and then we're gonna, because this is a conversation we're all really eager to have, and because these are three incredibly brilliant people in the field doing this work, we're gonna be a little bit informal, and so feel welcome to to be comfortable in our informality with this. We have a set of questions that we'll start with. And then also we'll pass the mic to others who want to participate in the question formation. We have a few slides that might illustrate a point here and there, so I'll probably be sometimes sitting to not be the creepy taller person, but then also sometimes coming over to make sure the slides are seen. So that's how we're going to roll. It's going to be a generative conversation, and I think hopefully better for it. I'll start over here. Shamar Bibbins is the Senior Program Officer on Environment for the Kresge Foundation. And you'll hear more about what the Kresge Foundation does during this panel if you don't know, but really incredible leader in nationally and kind of role maker for the world. Shamar plays a lead role managing Kresge's climate change, health, and equity initiative. The national initiative is a partnership between the Kresge's environment and health programs to address the intersecting imperatives of accelerating action on climate change and reducing health disparities. She also contributes to the development and implementation of program strategies and supports efforts that advance diversity, racial equity, and inclusion in the environmental field. Shamar joined Kresge in 2014, bringing a history of engagement in environmental efforts and a commitment to action on climate change. She previously served as the Director of National Partnerships for Green for All, a national nonprofit dedicated to building a green economy strong enough to lift people out of poverty. Shamar earned a bachelor's degree in Science, Technology, and Society from Vassar College, which, cool fact, we found out that our own Dr. Andrea Roberts and she were roommates in college. Such a small world. And received a Fulbright fellowship to Fukushima University, where she conducted research on environmental social movements in Japan. Jackie Patterson is founder and executive director of the Chisholm Legacy Project. Jacqueline Patterson is, the mission of the Chisholm Legacy project is rooted in a just transition framework, serving as a vehicle to connect Black communities on the front lines of climate justice with the resources to actualize visions. Prior to the launch of the Chisholm Legacy Project, Patterson served as senior director of the NAACP Environmental and Climate Justice Program for over a decade. During her tenure, she founded and implemented a robust portfolio, which included serving the state and local leadership, whose constituencies, consisted of hundreds of communities on the front lines of environmental justice. She also led a team in designing and implementing a portfolio to support political education and organizing work executed by the NAACP branches, chapters, and state conferences. Patterson holds a master's degree in social work from the University of Maryland and a master's degree in public health from Johns Hopkins University. And last but not least, Karen Abrams is the Director of City Planning for Pittsburgh. She joined with that role in February of 2022, and in this role, she oversees the city's work to establish and sustain a consistent approach to land use at the intersection of racial justice, social equity, and climate change. During her time in Pittsburgh, she's served also at the Heinz Endowment as a program officer for equitable development and community and diversity, and as a community and diversity affairs manager for the Urban Redevelopment Authority before that. Abrams has a wealth of experience in grant making at the neighborhood, city, and regional scales, supporting small-scale vacant lot improvements, managing federal implementation projects, and infusing equity into all the projects she's a part of. She earned a bachelor's degree in African American Studies from the University of Virginia. She was BSA president, and I'm proud of you for that. And a Master of Science in Sustainable Systems at Slippery Rock University. She was also a Loeb Fellow at the Harvard Graduate School of Design. So please join me in welcoming these spectacularly brilliant thinkers. Thank you all so much for being here. Do you want to start with slides or do you want to start without them?
It's up to you.
What do you think?
Slides?
Okay, they're kind of like a comfort sometimes to have the slide around. So we'll start there and see what happens. So we thought we would start. Don't worry, Dick. I'm gonna get my mic. Okay. We thought we would start with a big picture question as a way really to, for everyone to be more introduced more deeply to these thinkers and their perspectives, where they're coming from and where they think the field is really going. So I will let you decide who starts first, but what does climate justice mean in your work and how do you see it manifesting in cities across the globe?
You're looking at me, so... And I think the slide that I put up for this question, I'm sorry, Barbara, was really like trying to figure out what that was, right? This is my brain at work. And as you all heard, I'm a history major. History is something that I feel strongly about. And so I've been trying to figure out, like, I know where things went wrong, which is all the way over here. But I think the intersections of where the climate situation started there as well. And so how do these paths start to like meld? And they've been melding for a while, but how do we highlight where those things happened? How do we understand where root causes? My assistant director for strategic planning is here. And Sharonda's, I'm gonna talk about you. And we've been trying to figure out our comprehensive citywide plan. And so we really tried to figure out, okay, where is the history of this? Where are we starting? So we can kind of pinpoint where the planning intersects with obviously the racial codes and Jim Crow, obviously slavery itself, and try to figure out how to pull it apart and put it back together again. So I think that's just my perspective of how to do it from a perspective of history, a perspective of living in a city that really disinvested in growing up in Harlem, where disinvestment happened, and knowing that other cities are experiencing it. Pittsburgh is experiencing it, obviously. So I don't know what to do with all this, but I know that I have people who are around me we're thinking together around it, especially the staff at the City Planning Department who's ready to talk about, racial covenants, redlining, all those things, environmental justice areas in our city. So really trying to pull the data together around it and a history to tell a story. I think that the story has to be told, the truth has to be told about what happened so we can actually get to go forward. So I think there are many ways to do this, depending upon what city you're in. We're in Pittsburgh. Telling the Pittsburgh story is really where we're trying to go. So, I mean, that's just kind of where my brain is starting. And I have like about 8 people who have this, and we're all trying to add stuff and trying to share it with folks so we can all add it. And it'll probably be as large as this room if we can figure out how to like really put things on paper to see where these places are, so we have an understanding of what we have to actually deal with. I think that that's the problem. People think it's just some surface, and we just deal with something that's like in front of us, but we gotta understand the root causes of things and try to address that. So that's my story. I'm sticking to it for now. But thank you. Can you hear in the back? Okay, thank you. I know it's kind of weird.
Jackie, you want to come? Okay, can y'all hear me? Okay, great. I love this. I feel like if you haven't, you should share it with like every state across the country. So I'm with the Kresge Foundation, and we work in cities. So we pretty much we're a national foundation, but I think of us as a community development foundation. We work across 7 program areas to really expand opportunity and opportunity structures in U.S. cities. So the environment programming where I sit, we really work at this intersection, right, of cities, climate change, and racial and economic justice. And so this is really core and key, because if we're not talking, climate justice to me is really about talking about the root causes, right, of climate change, because we know the root causes of climate change are the root causes of every other inequity that the communities in which we serve and are, hope to protect face. So as we all say, right, climate change is a race problem, it's an economic problem, it's a housing problem, right? It's an everything problem. And so that's really how I think about it. That's how we think about it at the foundation. And that learning has deepened, right? Largely by having trusted partnerships with folks like Jackie Patterson and other, grantees, partners who we are in trusted relationships with to listen, and we listen to. We don't always get it right, right? But we listen, and we work really closely with cities as well, so that both cities as well as, equity organizations, community-based groups, anyone who really is responsible for the shape, form, function of a place, we like to say we want them to be asking the climate question. We want them to be asking the equity question, right? And a part of the justice implications is this, right? Understanding the root causes of why we're trying to solve the problems, because if we don't, then it's like you said, it's very surface, right, and it's like incremental changes that are not rooted in the transformation that we're all seeking.
Yeah, so to the similar points that you all both made, first with this great graphic, when we talk about climate justice, we talk about it in the context of just transition. I don't know if there's another question about just transition specifically, maybe?
No, we sort of it's embedded in several, but please go ahead.
I didn't want to be okay. Good.
Just give it a platform.
Okay, yeah. So when we talk about climate justice, it's about basically the unequal distributions of the impacts of climate change, and we as we've said, we talk about the systemic underpinnings of that. And so this graph really says it all in terms of just transition is about a transition from an extractive economy to a solidarity economy. And this graph really talks about how the United States of America was started under the principles and practices of an extractive economy from day one. From the minute folks arrived on this land and ended up repurposing it. And in terms of being in the United States of America, they came seeking extraction. They came seeking riches. And they came with this agenda that then resulted in the use of force to acquire what they have held on to for all of these centuries since then. And so the very foundation of our economy is around taking of land. It's around murder and displacement. It's around not only stealing the land, but then going on the ships and stealing the people, and then using it to really abuse the land, which is really where we are in terms of the systemic underpinnings of not only the the human rights abuses, but the earth rights abuses, which then comes back and harms us all in the form of climate change. And so that's so I just want to echo what folks were saying around that. But then when we talk about climate justice in terms of what justice looks like, we're starting to already see the signs of climate justice. When you talk about cities around the globe, there are places that are already beginning to demonstrate what it looks like to have the kind of systemic transformation that we need. Places like Evanston, Illinois, which was, I think, the first city to pass reparations legislation. Places like Portland, Oregon, which they managed to pass this Portland Clean Energy Fund that was written for the people, by the people, and is really a demonstration of what representational governance can truly look like when people are making decisions for themselves. And those kind of practices are rooted in the extractive economy, the regenerative economy and the solidarity economy, where wealth is being redistributed, and where the well-being of everyone is being considered, and the leadership of frontline communities is being centered. And so those are just a few examples I would give. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you so much. Let's talk obstacles for a minute, because we know this work is really hard. And all three of you have had both a sort of bigger picture role and as sort of trying to midwife this change in various different scales. So I feel like you know more than most. Where are the obstacles that communities run into when they're doing this work, and how might they, or how are they overcoming those obstacles?
So the Portland Clean, and the two examples you gave were really great examples. And I always like to give the example of Portland Clean Energy Fund, because, and I'll get to your answer. But I think before talking about the challenges, I think it's really important to understand what it even takes to get to that outcome of shared governance and shifting power. And so one of the ways in which we work in particular is really supporting and uplifting the voices, the leadership, the vision, of communities, so that they can be equal players and they can influence climate action plans and influence comprehensive plans in cities. But one of the things that we know to be true is that it takes a well-resourced movement to do these things. And so as a funder, this is really the role that we are able to play, because it's not just about, giving a grant, but we have a very specific point of view of why we're doing what we're doing. And so just thinking about the Portland Clean Energy Bill, when I first came to Kresge in 2014, we launched a new body of work called our Climate Resilience and Urban Opportunity Initiative. Jackie was one of the advisors on that, but I was a brand new program officer, and it was a brand new way of grant making for the foundation. It really flipped the frame from a very traditional climate program that was strong, really strong on climate adaptation, very strong on climate mitigation, but very little expression of equity. And both the adaptation and mitigation pieces of our portfolio were very siloed. And so the board at that time really asked the program prior to when I arrived, well, what does this climate program have to do with expanding opportunity for low-income people in U.S. cities? And so our managing director, who is still there, and the team at that time went through a very, very thoughtful process to reorient our program to what it is now. It was a version of that it's much deeper now, but it was a version of that in 2014. We've been implementing it over the last 8 to 10 years. But I say that to say it was very significant because it really flipped the frame of moving dollars directly to the ground, to community-based organizations, which was a very new way of grant making. Now, 10 years later, it's like, what? Of course that's what you do. But the group that we funded in Portland through the Climate Resilience and Urban Opportunity Initiative was a Native American group that partnered with a bunch of other organizations in Portland. And it was a 4-year initiative, and all of these community-based groups were funded for 4 years to really develop plans to influence local and regional climate resilience planning and implementation. And that group, one of the things that they started brainstorming around was this it wasn't called the Portland Clean Energy Fund at that time, but what would it look like, right, to really hold accountable polluters in that place, right? And so had it not been for literally 4 years of grant making for them to explore, to vision, to plan, right? I remember in the beginning we did a planning year and a 3-year implementation, and the grantees were like, wait, we really just get the plan? They were like, really? And so again, all of that happened. Then of course other funders came in, they did the work that they needed to do, but it's about how you have to trust the organizations, the communities, to know what they need. We didn't say you need to do a Portland Clean Energy Fund, right? We had no idea. It wasn't even a thing. I mean, maybe in their minds, right? But the well-resourcing of organizations and of movements, right? Even in the city, like cities need money to be able to align and implement. So the challenges often become, I think, lots of things. But as we've seen the importance of deepening the capacity of community-based groups who now are like throwing down across the country doing amazing things. I was saying to Jackie earlier, like we haven't even said that the last 5 years, most of the local and regional climate policies that have come out have been led by coalitions of color. That's significant, right? That couldn't happen if they weren't resourced to do that. But often what we're hearing as those groups are building capacity, sorry, city, but they will go into cities, right? And then there's a whole nother learning that they have to do with city actors because they don't necessarily understand the equity dimension. So that often becomes a problem. And then the cities, unfortunately, are, under-resourced, they're siloed, right? So that becomes a challenge and slows down progress. And then this other piece that I think is really problematic is the tension between the urgency of climate change and the need to build trusted, authentic partnerships and relationships. And that really slows us down. And yes, it's urgent. Climate change is urgent. We have, less than 7 years now, like it's urgent. But we can't let the urgency be a barrier to the process of equity and justice. And I think that is a big tension that is problematic. It can become problematic, and it has become problematic in the space. So I'll stop there, but those are some of the things I see.
I couldn't agree more. Like the difference between, or the tension between what is urgent and what is important always feels present in these conversations. I know we're going to have to hear from Jackie because she has a lot of, y'all do need to check out the website that Jackie's team has put together. It has resources that are just really incredible for like every possible systems change. So I want to hear from you. But first, I feel the need. So Karen is in an interesting position where she has been a funder, has been a sort of policy implementer in other realms, has been a thinker, and is now at a city. And so what do you think the role of a city, since you were already being apologized to for being obstructionist on occasion, because in some senses the answer was the obstacles are the city. So Karen, I'd like to give you...
Which is why they brought me here.
Yes.
They brought me to Pittsburgh to be the city planning director so I can...
So you can help change things.
Yes.
So I give you the floor.
No, thank you for there's so many obstacles. I mean, Pittsburgh, as many of you may know, is like a post-industrial city, right? So we have a deficit frame in everything that we're doing. Our tax base has been lost because of the outward migration of folks after the fall of the steel industry. So desperation doesn't call for you to think about the future too much, but how do you just pave your roads? We had a bridge collapse. Infrastructure is a nightmare. So no one's thinking about the future, right? Or thinking about the present even. We're dealing with landslides and flooding, and people are still trying to build in the floodplain. And so you're trying to figure out how to talk to people who are really in a day-to-day trying to stay alive about the future. Not blaming anybody, but that's just the condition, and you've got to kind of drag people to this is urgent. So our office is constantly mayor's office, please help us with this. So getting the conversation happening at the mayor's office is like a huge thing because the mayor's office is where everything happens. And so it's been a challenge. It's been a definite challenge because we have violence. I mean, the numbers around violence are going up in cities. That's the most pressing thing, like getting the snow plowed, getting the streets paved. I mean, people's daily lives are impacted by these things. And so trying to get the attention of the folks in power to think about, we need to think about our flood situation. Infrastructure is another thing that we need to think about around climate because Pittsburgh's going to have a lot more rain. And we need to make sure that we have, we have the resources to deal with that. And you want to stop me?
No, I wanna make you follow up because I hadn't thought this through. Why is Pittsburgh gonna have a lot more rain?
What's Pittsburgh having a lot more
You
rain?
taught me this. Why
did?
more rain than it did before? Why?
I taught you this.
Yes, because it's
And
getting
I
hotter.
It's yes. I mean, yes. We're not
Well,
right.
but I'm just
Yes, there's a
gonna-
whole like there's the snow. There's no more like the snow is. We had I think the least amount of snow in February ever on record, and it's now rain. And so snow sits for a while and it melts slowly and the earth can absorb it and we can absorb it. But when it's just coming down in inches and feet when it was originally snow and it's rain, it's the flooding, it's the landslides are occurring. So the warmer our climate's getting, the worse the potholes are, the more flooding we have, the more people's houses are falling off the sides of hills and mountains. And so we have a landslide at least like once a week. And getting people to move away from like it's just a lot at a city level where we have a deficit mentality and we are in a deficit a lot of times. Planning for the future and trying to plan for the catastrophe is not what we're doing. We are responding to it. We're reacting to it. And people, I had a staff person say to me, and I know it was true, and I've been in Pittsburgh for 10 years, 12 years now, and I've seen this. We've become the Department of Reaction as opposed to the Department of City Planning. And we're trying to make this a Department of Planning. The first thing we said, we're going to come in and try to figure out how to plan. We made sure that the just transition was the foundation for our plan. We got the endorsement of the mayor's office to go ahead and do this. And so we're ready to roll. We have an amazing resilience and sustainability resilience division that is amazing. We're building up a strategic planning division so that we can do real engagement with the communities who are impacted by this. So we're trying to we're still in the planning processes, but I think engaging with community, providing them, we want to fund our organizations to do engagement. And so that they are a part of the planning process. They are the ones who are most impacted, our Black communities, because Pittsburgh is it's more black and white than it is anything else. And they're living in the areas that are getting flooded, the areas that have been neglected for so long. The areas that, the policing, over-policing is impacting them. And that impacts their economic ability to make money. And all the inequities that we've seen in the city have got to close. And we're going to use this process to do so. And making sure that climate is the center, because I think in Pittsburgh, you think about, people talk about climate change or sustainability. And there really is not a thought about Black communities. Jackie, thank God, she came to Pittsburgh and helped us establish the Black Environmental Collective. And our first meeting was about 20 people. The second one was about 50 people, and they just kept growing because there are Black people who care about the environment and care about climate change. They don't necessarily express it the way wealthy white people do, who have been the people who received all of the resources and all of the recognition for the work. They experience it very differently. They experience it in violence, environmental violence. They experience it around childbirth. The impacts of all the polluted air and soil and water on maternal health. So it manifests itself very differently. So understanding those stories and those narratives helps us build a story about climate justice in a city. So we're hoping that we can do that.
A smart person also prepped this slide. Do you want to? This is how Karen and I met, is that I was assigning this amazing article that she wrote when she was the Loeb Fellow, Hijinks in Harlem, The Whiteness of Place. You can Google it and it'll come right up as an open access piece of writing. And I was being interviewed on some podcast and they were like, "What are you reading?" And I was like, "Karen Abrams." So Karen was like, "Hi, stalker," and introduced herself to me. Anyway, will you speak about this a little bit?
So I think, this is still a evolving thought, but I mean, I was talking about my experience as living in Harlem and understanding that when Black people did things, it was criminalized immediately. And because of the lack of resources that Black people have, and in New York is Black and Puerto Rican, Cuban, Dominicans, that we had to be resourceful. And it happens in every single city, right? So the criminalization of gypsy cabs, for example, the yellow cabs would not go up to Harlem or to parts of Brooklyn or the Bronx. They would not go anywhere in the Bronx. And so we had to figure out a way to get around that, to work around it. So we had gypsy cabs. They were illegally run, but Black people could flag down a gypsy cab and get into one and go anywhere they wanted to in the city. The same holds true for, I mean, I think about Airbnb and Uber are like, those are definitely, because we could not stay in hotels when we were at certain places. And so we had to Airbnb it back in the day. You think about urban agriculture, which is something that people are acting as though it's brand new. It's existed since people have been in cities and have migrated up to Harlem. So I think that the rebranding and the co-opting of culture is definitely a challenge, I think. And the innovation that's in communities of color, we need to recognize it. We need to actually fund it. We need to actually lift it up, because that's going to save us. Because I think that folks who are least resourced tend to be very innovative in solutions to real problems. And so that was like that moment. I'm still kind of trying to develop what that means for us as a city planning department. We don't have all the answers. And I think recognizing that, yes, we are like technical experts, we're not experts in people's lives. And so understanding how we can be helpful in that space is what I'm really interested in.
Thank you. Jackie, will you add to the conversation?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, when I read this, I thought about, I think it was Frederick Douglass who said, "Without vision, the people perish." Is that? Yeah, okay. And I thought about, actually, again, the work of Dr. Andrea Roberts and the Texas colonies. One of the communities that I've been working in for the last few years is Sand Branch, Texas, a freedmen settlement, which was founded by 11 people who were emancipated from enslavement from Louisiana, who moved to Texas and then got this plot of land back in 1865 and founded this community. And the community has not had running water since the mid-'80s, when their water supply was contaminated there, and the well water. And they have really relied on bottled water ever since then. And I thought about that community and the work that we've been doing there, and that after all of those years of just relying on those literally cases and cases of those 16.9 ounce bottles of water for their cooking, cleaning, eating, all of washing, all of the different things. And so by the time we got to them, they really had given up in a lot of ways. Not only did they have the situation with the water, but they didn't have trash pickup. The FEMA had declared them to be a 1% floodplain, and so they were subject to the FEMA buyout program. And with the FEMA buyout program, they assessed the value of their land, which, because of no water pickup and no trash pickup and so forth, was very low. And then they subtracted the amount it would have taken them to demolish the homes that are on the property. And for many of the people, they got checks for $350 for property that had been in their families from generations and generations. And so when you had that kind of assault after assault after assault on your dignity, on your humanity, on your rights, and they're right outside of Dallas, one of the richest cities in the world. They have the GDP of some nations, and so they really had reached a point of having given up. They'd seen people come in and out with promises and so forth, and they just didn't see a way out of no way. But as you say, we are a resilient people. We always do find a way. And so and they certainly didn't trust anyone coming in. So it took us kind of a good 3 years to even have them really beginning to engage with them. But now they're coming out, and they're figuring out, they're starting to fight back, they're starting to rise up, and they're starting to see justice for themselves and for their communities. But this obstacle of having been beat down on every side, having politicians they're unincorporated communities, so the counties don't even necessarily feel beholden to them, because they're not necessarily the voters that they feel like they need to kind of be in service of. And so they really felt disregarded. And so that kind of, when you have that level of assault, you either kind of rise up or you just you just lay down. And they had almost reached the point of laying down. But then the infusion of just a few resources, just a few people who started to believe in them, people who really built relationship and stayed faithful, even when they weren't opening the doors, even when the town hall meetings didn't have anybody showing up. Just kind of that steadfast, we believe in you, here are some resources to begin to do this work, and they began to see that hope. But unfortunately, there's community after community that's in that situation where whether it's the fossil fuel industry or the big pharma or the big, whoever the big industries are, where they reach a point of almost hopelessness. And that's where we find some of the biggest barriers. But we also see the way of liberation is really to provide even to begin to facilitate radical imagination, so that people do have a vision of what's possible. So it's not just kind of plugging the holes in the dam as they continue to spring up, but to actually see how do you restore the integrity of the entire situation. And so for us, we've seen that happen in place after place, whether it's Sand Branch, Tamina, also another place that Dr. Roberts pointed out in Texas there through the Texas Colonies Project that she led. There are places that are beginning to find their way, but it's necessary to really recognize these places exist, begin to make sure that there are pathways for resources for the communities, and to make sure that communities begin to vision. One of the things that we had as a challenge was when we started to have a vision, the visions were based on, it reminded me when I would go to different cities and check into hotels, and they would say I was with the NAACP, and they would say, oh, what are you all fighting against? And so it was always about what are we fighting against? And and so now we really want to flip it to what are we fighting for? And so once we start to facilitate those conversations and continue with deeper inquiry, as we, in the beginning, it was about like just not having contaminated water, just not having to burn our trash in our backyard, just not having these polluting industries surrounding us, until it's like, oh, I'd love to have this. I'd love to have a beautiful place to live. I would love to have a thriving economy. I would love to have, a place where my kids can just play with joy. Like the notion of joy was, it's all about survival versus joy when you're in that state. But to get us to a place where you can peel back the layers until you can get to joy is really what we see in terms of the path to overcoming the obstacles. So, thank you.
That's very beautiful. More joy for sure. There's no doubt. Okay, we'll stay in the less joyful place for just a little bit longer, and then we'll move the whole conversation to joy. So don't worry. And this is Karen's fault. This is your question. I blame you. How can cities ensure that their sustainability and resilience efforts are not leading to gentrification?
Oh, yes. Okay. I don't know. It's like the question, the always question. It's the every time you think we can do this, and we're like, no, because it's going to gentrify the neighborhood. I mean, which is a loaded word. I mean, I'm not going to act like it's not a loaded word. It's a very loaded word. So I used to work at the Urban Redevelopment Authority because it's about land. It's about property ownership. It's about land. And the next other slide is essentially, it's the redlining map. I mean, it's where all the vacancy is. It's where the low-income neighborhoods are. It's where the Black people live in Pittsburgh. And so, we have to control the land. I mean, it's only there people try to figure out all kinds of things. In Pittsburgh, we have an opportunity to purchase the land, the publicly owned land that is in these neighborhoods. And that whole process is pretty nefarious in and of itself, how the land became public land in the first place. I mean, it was privately owned land with people's houses on it, people lived there. And they left because their land, the value of their property just went down. In order to fix their roof, the roof fixture cost more than the house is worth. So these are the reasons why we have publicly owned land. For a long time, what ended up happening, which was pretty, again, nefarious, was that the URA the urban development used to consolidate all the land and then put it back into private use through affordable housing. So it went from private, Black people privately owned land to being affordable housing. So we need to figure out, and I've been talking to the woman who runs the redevelopment authority, because this is what I have to do as a director of city planning, is say, hey, how do we secure this land? Because once we start doing these amazing things in Black neighborhoods, by like making them greener, by, providing actually, like food, like, healthy foods, it'll be attractive to like wealthy people, and they'll be displaced. So it's a matter of how do we begin to start buying this property for the reasons that we need to buy them for the community, so that they can decide what happens with it. So they can decide whether they want to do a land trust or whatever they feel like they want to do with it. You got to honor that. And that's kind of where I've started to kind of get to, because I can't think of any other way to do it. I mean, real estate is, it's a premium in some places. Thank goodness Pittsburgh has not gotten to the way of New York City or even Portland, right? And Black people are actually, they're moving out of the city to find other places to live. However, we figure if it's about land ownership, and if it's about people being able to stay in place and to age in place, we have to figure out how to, as a city, control the land so that the folks who live there can stay there. There are probably tons of other reasons, other opportunities that I want to hear from Jackie and Shamar and others, because we do need all that we can get around how to keep people in place.
I don't know if you've had a chance to talk to folks in Detroit, but yes, everything's
Okay.
there. And there, because we have lots of vacant land, of course,
Yes.
as well. And the city has a program for to buy lots at very low prices to do a lot of the projects on there. So they actually are transferring the property, or they can buy the property to do community gardens. And there's a few different programs, so it might be an opportunity to talk to Detroit about that. And then also there's an effort where the local CDCs come together to organize and strategize together so that they can be more of one voice with the city around what needs to happen. So there's a couple of things that I know that are happening in my home.
Okay.
So
Are you from Detroit originally?
I am born and raised.
Wow.
Yeah, born and raised. So like you started in the beginning, very, very much. I grew up in Detroit. I'm gonna date myself. I don't care. I grew up in Detroit in the 80s.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So all the trappings of disinvestment, automobile industry moving out, crack epidemic, all those things, right? And we lived in the city. So I'm very much aware firsthand of what it looks like when the community is disinvested.
Right.
And not only disinvested in the built environment, but it dims the brilliance of the people.
Right.
So yeah, very real.
Yes. So, so keeping on the Sand Branch situation, one of the things that's now happening as the community starts to, each of the households are now getting hydro panels so that they now have running water, that it's coming through a solar panel and atmospheric water generation, and a lot more is happening there, and the property values are going up. Therefore, the property taxes are going up, and it's a problem. And we also we're actually in conversation with Habitat for Humanity. They just got a large infusion of money from Mackenzie Scott, and which is Jeff Bezos' ex-wife, and now we're having to kind of pause on that while we figure out what we're going to do about the fact that the property values will go up further once we rehab all of the houses. And so now we're in conversation with folks like Right to the City, which is an organization I would definitely recommend folks check out, to talk about like what can we do, what kind of local ordinance can we try to put in place. But part of the problem is that we think that the county is actually part of this effort to drive the folks away from Sand Branch. Because as you said, right near like walking distance from Sand Branch is a community where they have like gates that open up automatically. It's a very they have a sewage system, they have, trash pickup, they have all the things, and it's literally walking distance from Sand Branch. And we think that there is an effort underway to purposely get people out, to thirst people out of Sand Branch and so forth. And so we don't think we're going to be able to gather, we're trying to figure out what do we have to do to kind of have the power to actually advance a local ordinance, especially since Sand Branch is unincorporated. So these are the kinds of questions that we need to be able to answer to be, so meanwhile, literally people's quality of life is being depressed by the realities of the displacement that pretty much automatically happens with gentrification in many cases. So that's not answering the question in terms of ensuring, but as a result of this problem, I have done a lot of research around, and now I'm putting together kind of a toolkit on what the policy landscape can look like in terms of preventing displacement. Like, so even as, depending on how we define gentrification, even when there is community improvement, how do we make sure that the community stays the community that actually benefits from the improvement? And so there is a great suite of policies that have different application in different places, but we're trying to see what kind of suite of policies would work in Sandbridge. But for municipalities in general, I would definitely recommend the Right to the City policy platform. Center for American Progress actually has a pretty decent policy platform on what kind of ways that you can put policies in place to make sure it doesn't lead to displacement.
It's like, give me for answers too. I've got questions, so thank you.
Okay, here's where we get back to the joy. What opportunities do you see emerging that are new to the field of practice?
This may not. I don't know if this is new. I think this is a new. I think you mentioned collective action. I think people are more willing and able to figure out how to act collaboratively and collectively. And I don't know if it's COVID or what happened during COVID. I could tell you about Pittsburgh specifically. Understanding the political pieces of this work, right? Because I think people often forget or just don't think about the fact that we elected officials play a huge role in our lives. And really connecting a lot of this work to the actual big P politics. And I think what happened during COVID is everybody was, home and had a chance to really kind of think about a lot of things. And they started to, and Zoom made it easier. It flattened our ability to actually work together. And so in Pittsburgh, it was pretty amazing because we elected the first Black mayor of the city in its history. It was a really amazing racial, intergenerational coalition of folks who really understood to elect 4 Black judges elected in the county. I mean, so we understand the power of collective action, and I see that as an emerging thing. And how do we capitalize on that? And understanding how sending the first Black congresswoman in Pennsylvania to Congress, the Pittsburghers did that too. And because she understood, you cannot just speak to one person. To one group. It's speaking to everybody. And I think that's an opportunity that we do have in Pittsburgh, that people are actually more aware, they're more connected to each other, and connecting people to each other. A lot of my work that I did when I was at the Heinz Endowment was just that. How do we start to talk about, you're doing something very familiar, not forcing you to work with them, but hey, this person over here is doing something similar to what you're doing. You don't have to be a coalition, but just have a conversation and just pulling people together. So I think bringing people together, and you can do it during Zoom. You can do it all over. I mean, we had a global the Edge Funders Conference. I didn't have to travel at all. I just sat there, listened to all these amazing women who were in Nicaragua doing all this amazing stuff. And so the power of the internet, we're taking it really seriously with connecting people. So I know it's very old and it's not necessarily the question. But I think that in and of itself is powerful.
Also, you put up the slide.
I did put up the slide.
I love this slide too.
Oh, I did put up the slide. Because I was thinking about I was thinking also about you all. In the school, and we often silo in planning departments for some strange reason. And I'm not a planner. I am a diversity planning, but it's a siloing of people's lives. right? I mean, I think we have people, when I got to the department, they was like, we're going to hire somebody to do economic development, and we're going to hire somebody to do housing. And I'm like, well, all those people are going to talk to each other because people live their lives and they don't live in our silos. And so I think that's part of the trend that's happening in planning is that planning departments are starting to think about climate in the same space, right? Like how do we start talking about all these things intersectionally? And I'm hoping that this it happens here at UVA and other schools because it does lend itself to you understanding as a planner how people live on a daily basis so that you understand that some things that you're doing on an economic development end could really backfire from like a food security end and a mobility end. So how do you really think about these things in a real intersectional way? So that's why that slide came up, and we're still trying to find people to fill these positions. And I think eventually the idea is to have them all fold up into strategic planning, neighborhood planning, because the people who are doing that planning on neighborhoods are going to need these resources and these tools to talk to residents about their daily lives. Thank you for reminding me about this slide.
You're welcome.
And then the kids, this is for the kiddies. I think making sure that as planners, you're all young, but making sure that like the 12-year-olds, right, are involved in the work, because I'm not planning for me necessarily. I'm 52 years old in less than a month. We're hoping that we're planning for people who aren't even born yet, right? What world do we want them to have? What legacy do you want to leave for them also in the planning process? And so our mayor, who's in the middle, he's made it a real like mission of his to ensure that the city government, all the staff, are involved some way with the public school system and the children who are in that system. Because, they're going to be the leaders of the future. And we've got to make sure that we're investing and pouring ourselves in there. Sharonda has made it very clear that we are going to have young people who are involved in our planning process. Because oftentimes, it's the folks who don't have anything to do all day, who show up at the meetings, who have the time and attention. And how do you go to the school? How do you go to the after-school program and actually engage with young people about what they see for their futures? And so that's why I put this picture up as well. So this is a great event that I had to attend. They were helping us try to figure out, they were helping cities, like our department heads, figure out how to tackle some real issues. And they had, they pulled out the boards. It's like a science fair. Mm-hmm. And we're getting them as interns in the department. Like, we've got to get them in the city to help us because they have a lot of really great ideas.
So I think, is this still on? I don't think it's on anymore. Oh, maybe could I just use it?
Absolutely.
Okay. So I love the intersectionality slide. Because I think, so in terms of where I think things are going, one, a focus on intersectionality in terms of how climate is the everything issue. And so I'm glad to hear that y'all are really thinking about this, because I think what we need more of, and there's a lot we're seeing in terms of cities thinking about climate informed community and economic development, but we have a ways to go. And to me, that's, I think, the lens we need to be thinking about more. Community-led, climate-informed community economic development, right? So thinking about the multiple benefits you actually get by solving for climate in your transportation plan, your water plan, right? So I think more of that, and we're seeing good examples, but not enough, for sure. I think also, it's not new, but I would say the last 10 years or so, we've really been building the field around what does community-led climate resilience look like, right? And I think there's tons of frameworks, there's tons of practices on how that looks. You have now more funders of like, yes, we should fund the grassroots. And what I think is happening now is that you're seeing much more collaborative governance models. Again, not nearly enough, right? But I think about the Climate and Community Protection Act in New York, right? All of that was developed by multi-issue, multiracial coalition to even get it passed, right? And so now there's all of these different things that are happening to make sure the implementation of that goes well. Even in the Portland, Clean Energy Fund, there's new processes that are actually combining community and local sustainability directors. So you're seeing more of the collaborative governance across cities. We need more of that. We need more and more and more and more of that. I think another thing that we're thinking about a lot, as well as a lot of other funders, is like, how do we support not only the programmatic work of our climate justice organizations, but individuals who are on the front lines leading climate justice work around their well-being and their wholeness, right? Jackie and I are working on something together around that. And our team is thinking deeply about it. We have a whole new field building strategy focused on climate justice movement support, which includes both organizational but individual. And I think that's essential, right, for us to really be thinking about how do we care for the leaders who are holding so much of this work. So we're seeing a little bit more of that. We need more. So we need more of all of the things. But there are, I think, some important trends there are certain signals that are promising.
Yes, I would just add, although I'd love to stay in the well-being space, and now I feel like, anyway, but the one thing that I'm seeing that's interesting is that people are actually thinking at the local level about major capital. How do we move, like even in an anti-capitalist, framework that we're trying to move in, we're recognizing that yes, we see capitalism as the root of all evil in terms of the extractive economy, and that is where we are. We're in a capitalist economy, and so we need to figure out how folks can thrive in the current economy, even as we try to shift to an economy that really centers human rights and earth rights. And so we're seeing places like the Crenshaw in New York, in Los Angeles, where the community, there was a Crenshaw Mall was closing, had closed, and the property was up for sale, and the group came together called Crenshaw Rising, and they managed to amass $25 million in capital to buy this mall in a fairly low income, pretty impoverished community. But because there are groups like Justice Funders, Full Spectrum Capital, and others that are actually putting their focus on making sure that the most economically disenfranchised communities have access to capital, so that we can actually begin to have community-driven processes that aren't just kind of communities trying to kind of beg at the behest of other decision makers, so that communities actually hold the wealth themselves to be able to make decisions for themselves in their own communities. And so that's a shift that I'm seeing that's really interesting. I'm a part of this group called Just Futures, where it's where a number of nonprofits are actually starting their own kind of equivalent of a 401k. So we're investors, doing social impact investing in our own communities, and then that is being used for our retirement funds for each of our nonprofits. And so these are the kinds of new models that are coming about to really make sure that because right now, of course, the very funds that are funding people's retirements are often the very industries that are also killing people in the first place, so they don't even reach retirement, because they're fossil fuel companies, pharmaceutical companies that live to make sure that we stay sick. And so this is the way our investments are going now. So if we actually are developing new investment vehicles, again, all while trying to eliminate capitalism in the first place, but recognizing that that's where we are, then we can at least have those investments in those markets and things that actually support our human rights and earth rights. So,
thank you. On this thread of capital, also new, right? We're in a historic moment where we have historic amounts of money coming out of the federal government to fund climate work, and so this is also a new thing. It's one of those things where lots of money come in, the absorption of it is really tricky. But there are lots and lots of really good work happening to try to ensure that the delivery of trillions of dollars that are going to start coming out in the summer, right? really do have a different delivery mechanism and actually get closer to the ground. The money's going to come, and the question is, will it go to the usual suspects, or will the communities who need it most really benefit? And so there's a lot of really important work that's happening in foundations and cities and community groups to ensure Justice 40 benefits, but also all the other monies coming out of the federal government. So that's a new urgent piece that's a lot of people are working hard on.
I'm going to hold the mic just briefly to ask the next question, which feels perfectly aligned here. And it did come up, thank you, Jackie, as it should. But I want to center it since it's such a huge part of, I think, the vision that all of us see for the future. If we're really going to bring a movement from extractive, exploitive economies to regenerative communities of care, what does it look like? And how do we get that work really going? You don't have to speak first, but
I always say trust the people. That is my first and foremost. Trust the people, meaning trust that the people who are closest to the problem absolutely are a part of the solution, and not just to engage them, right? Not just to check a plan off, but to truly be active participants. That is, to me, one of the most essential things in ensuring a just transition. And that we're expanding tables and we're expanding partnerships. Not that the community knows everything, but how do you bring new relationships and expand those tables and expand those relationships? That's, I think, really, really important. The other thing I would say is not just relying on, again, this is kind of the first thread, not just relying on community groups and community voices to only, that they can't do the technical and hard things, right? Oftentimes, we see a lot more dollars going to community groups, but often it's like, well, there's still not a trust factor of that. They can move the policy. They can have the technical pieces to understand how to, change the financial paradigm, right? So I just think we have to really hold that trust in a really genuine and authentic way, in ways that we haven't done before. And we have to hold folks accountable. So thinking about all the federal work happening, right? There's a White House Advisory Committee of many, environmental justice giants and leaders, and that work is not easy, right? And so they're pushing. You have to hold people accountable, have the hard conversations. It's messy. A transformation is messy. And so I think the accountability is important. I think the resourcing, of course, is important, but trusting that community voice is not just a side piece, but it has to be integrated, so that, again, to get to the urgency of climate, we can't go at it alone, right? We have to be in better community and collaboration together, and you only can do that by having authentic and trusted partnerships. So that's, I think, the essential piece.
I should go next. I yes to everything that everybody said, but I think telling the truth. Go back to tell the truth. Like, we gotta tell the truth, and the truth is not an easy thing for people who have been told a myth for so long. I think about I put the red on the map because everybody should, like, this. Every planning course should start with like what this means, because that defines what you are going to be doing for the rest of your time in school, right? So the truth telling about this, about why cities look the way they look, about why people are poor, why people are sick often, why people are unhoused, why people don't have the same education. These things are because of this, and that's really, in my estimation, how we get to really understanding the truth and knowing how to actually address it. Because I think we're in a situation now where everybody wants to shut down, African American history and African studies, and African history is American history, but like, they're trying to shut down the nuance that that there is in the history of African Americans in this country, or Black people in general in this country. And so this is essential to the work that I want to be able to do. In my role, wherever it is, whether it's the director of city planning, whether it was in philanthropy, which is a really hard place to tell the truth. Especially, in my particular, I'm talking about you, but like I said, for a lot of Black people in philanthropy, it's been a hard thing to talk about the truth. especially if you're talking about, the origins of even the money that comes into philanthropy, right? I mean, and I remember during COVID, like I was at my former job, it was a meeting about like, what are the problems? And I'm like, well, are we part of the problem? Like a serious question, is philanthropy part of the problem of the inequities, in our country? And people email me like, thank you for saying that. I just say things because they come to my mind, but I think we need to be honest about, how we can get in our own way around a lot of things. So that's what I was thinking about when I was thinking about like what we need. Because the history of the article about the Plantationocene, like the history of climate change starts with capitalism. And that is a truth that we need to kind of uncover and talk about in a very real way. And capitalism could be, people talk about, well, this is the way it is right now, but like it feeds into our political system. So we need to really think about the entire system and really know the truth around all the aspects of it. And it's going to be hard for us to deal with, right? And knowing that, right? Like I, was a happy capitalist for a very long time. And so I started to read, understand things, and I'm not a very happy capitalist now, right? And so then what's the next step for me in this whole process? But it is like a mourning of sorts that people have to go through, but you'll come out of this, hopefully we'll all come out of this alive, and stronger for it. And that's just the hope and dream that I have for people, so.
Yeah. Thank you. That was beautiful. I like to end on that note. I would just say that we have to recognize that the work has already started, that there are already examples that we can follow. Like there are places where the just transition is already showing success. Places like Soul Fire Farm, where people are already growing their own food and already really living in right relationship with the land. We already talked about the Portland Clean Energy Fund. That's an example of the way that we should be doing policy making in a just transition in a living economy, which is rooted in deep democracy. Places like the Black Mesa Water Coalition, where they are not only having a kind of a water cooperative, community-owned water cooperative, but also they're generating their own electricity through solar. Places like there's so many examples of, even in Massachusetts, the Toxic Soil Busters, a group of youth who came together to do soil remediation. Just as you were saying that people act like we don't have those technical skills, but youth came together and did literal soil remediation in that community. So we are already living. There's places all over, not just in the United States, but the Global Eco Village Network, which is places all over the world that have committed to creating microcosms of a solidarity economy, a living economy. And so we just really have to just take that to scale. And even during COVID, we start to see where even at scale, we saw where it was possible. We had universal basic income basically during COVID. We had mutual aid where people were growing their own food and sharing it across the country. So we've seen where it's possible. We just have to live into it, into that transformation. So.
And Jackie, I think you mentioned the storytelling earlier. Not only living into it, but lifting up the storytelling asset, right? Exactly. So people know more that this is already
What role should repair play? Right, we've talked a lot about acknowledgement of not only the truth of our histories, but those root causes. So, how does repair factor into all this work?
I think a just transition is repair. That is the repair, right? If we're doing it correctly in the way, by some of the examples that Jackie just named, that is the repair.
No, this question or the repair part of the conversation always eludes me, right? I think about the NAP ministry, right? We talked about the NAP ministry, but as rest as repair, right? Like how, we work so many hours of a day, and I was talking to my girlfriends this afternoon about we work to a point where it's like, when do we rest? And when we do rest, what does that really mean? Does it mean that you sleep in your bed all day? That's kind of what it's been for me for a while. But like, what does rest really mean? And I think, what is another repair? Joy. Like, those are the things that, in art and beauty, like, and in Pittsburgh, speaking from a city, people don't see a lot of that. So how do we start to give people that break from the vacant lots and the litter and the trash? And how do we start to think about what that looks like reparatively? How do we think about, like, where do people go for that? So, I mean, we're thinking about this stuff, but I mean, my repair is different than, your repair and yours and, everybody else's. And so I don't know what it looks like for a community, right? Which is like, why the question is always,
Well, what would that look like, right? Like if families in a community could thrive, they could actually have running water in Sandbridge. They could actually, right? Like it's so many things that, like when you were just talking, I was like, wow, what would that actually feel like, right? That where many communities didn't have to walk past trash and they don't have an incinerator and the power plant. And like, what would that even feel like?
Yeah, I'm thinking about.
I wonder.
No, but like I think like oftentimes, they're owed, like people are owed something, right? And is that the repair? Is the justice the repair?
Yeah,
Because I think people are oftentimes like doing it on their own because no one's gonna do it for them, obviously. But what would it look like for people to just do what they're supposed to be doing for communities as opposed to them?
Yes.
So that's what I wonder about that a little bit.
Yeah.
Do you have a repair? Do you work through repair?
I think you have to hold the mic.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm just talking to her right now. But like, having a side conversation. But like, I think about like, I mean, I know in philanthropy, it's been a big thing, right? How do you people rest?
Yeah.
Like, your grantees are like working, 80 hours a week. They don't take vacation.
Right.
They don't have health care. How do you think of? I mean, are you working?
I mean, that is a small part of what I described earlier with our climate justice movement support, where we're thinking about the individual,
okay.
right? Like ways for them to be celebrated, to rest. So it's a small beginning that we have in our team. But other programs across the foundation, particularly our arts and culture team, have repair definitely interwoven into like how they think about their strategy.
Okay.
So it's expressed different ways in different programs, and to be honest, we are just entering that space in the environment program, but we're excited to do so, and it's much more that we can definitely do.
No, this is.
Yeah, no. I'm just acknowledging, like, just being honest.
It was a good question because how do we think about this from like a city perspective, from like a comprehensive plan or a citywide plan? I'm sorry, I have to get these things. Sharonda had to tell me what the difference was between a comprehensive plan and a citywide plan. I'm not a planner, so I don't know these things. But like, how do we can we integrate this into our planning process? Like what repair looks like? We can. Okay, thank you. This is her. She's doing all the work around it. So I'm just making sure I can check in with her. You said yes, we can do that.
So I would say it's not possible to repair in the context of an extractive economy because people are constantly being re-injured. So we have to, like it's just not going to. Like we can kind of protect ourselves and buffer a little bit, but as long as you have, and one of the things that we have to recognize as a mindset is one of abundance. Like when people came to this Turtle Island, to this nation, to this land, there was an automatic perception, and in order for them to thrive, other people had to be oppressed. And so that inverse relationship has sustained to this day. And unless we get out of that the mindset of that inverse relationship of well-being, Thank you.
Oh, this is great.
Okay, so the last question is actually about us. So what should we be doing? What should schools of architecture? We've got architecture, landscape architecture, urban planning, and architectural history here. We are connected to a whole university and a whole community. What's boss us around a little bit. What should we be doing here? And y'all get the mic next.
I feel like a lot we've said. I'm gonna asterisk. So I think one of the most important things is having a curriculum that's really grounded in structural inequities. That map should be a course in of itself, right? To work in a city, to work in planning, like we have to really tell the truth about why our cities look the way they do. So I think that's first and foremost. I think to whatever degree we can really be having cross department learning is critical, and not only learning, but like, are there ways, I'm sure you already do this, but practicums, right? So there's real work grounded in like, how would I do this with the planner, with the water person, with the social justice, lawyer, like having that practicum, I think it would be essential and important, like to go into the real world, already having those skills. And then I think being in community with community, even right in place, right where you are. So I know the Equity Center does that, which is great, but more opportunities for students across the curriculum to not even make it like it would be a nice thing to do, but as like, this is what you actually need to do.
Okay, I think we want to have time for a few thoughts and questions.
Oh, did you?
Oh, good. Oh, you were.
I had a slide up.
Oh, you did. You did.
The slide that like.
I'm not trying to stop you from showing this slide.
Especially as that dream,
Yeah. No, this is like, so my friends, I did not go to the theater to see Black Panther, and I haven't seen the last one either. But like, I read a lot about people's responses to the world of Wakanda. And I am motivated by the fact that like a lot of architects, not a lot, I shouldn't say that, that's not true. But enough architects and urbanists really think about this as like the perfect place. Like, I mean, there's no cars. Right, so there's a climate like idea around this. Is people-centered places, and you don't have to go back to the to like the early 19th century to find inspiration. You can find it in the future. And I remember when I was at the Graduate School of Design up at Harvard, and what's his name, Krabasi, whatever that guy's name was. It was awful. Like, I was like, who is this monster who created all this mayhem? But like, that's what happens in the School of Architecture, because they keep going back. I mean, I'm sure that he had some nice ideas, but we put him to rest, right? And not all your motivation has to come from Europe, right? We know this, right? We study African history. So we know there's some amazing things happening. I mean, unfortunately, this was an idea about like what if you go to like Lagos, if you go to, any parts of Ghana, if you go to any African city, that energy that's there, it's just amazing. And, and I think about also during COVID, the folks who responded the best to this, because they've had the adversity of all kinds of other things, was in the continent of Africa. And so we've got to start to look at other places for our inspiration. And it cannot just be Europe. I mean, and so it's got to look at South America. Because I'm trying to get my sustainability team to like, you've got to go to South America. You've got to go to the Global South, because that's where a lot of the population is dealing with climate change in very real ways. And we can learn a lot from them. So I just wanted to put my Wakanda slide up there. And I will probably see the second Black Panther on Netflix. I apologize. You just saw it.
I haven't seen it.
You haven't. But this was like something that I remember reading about people like Venice are looking at Wakanda, and I'm like, they should be.
Yes, and relatedly, I would say it would be great if, as architects, you could develop your own like set of principles and unite around them and say we refuse to design something that's not based on regenerative design, as an example. Like if you really bind together and put together a set of justice-based, of sustainability-based principles that you all adhere to, then people aren't going to be able to find someone to design these poorly designed facilities. So that's one thing that I would absolutely say as something that people can do very practically. Yeah.
Yes.
So thank you. Great vibranium on Earth here. Yeah.
That's a very wonderful idea. I like it. It's like we can get on that. Well, I know it's past 6:30, but I'm really grateful to have had this conversation here with my colleagues. So thank you so much for coming, and thank you for being with us. Have a good night.